My name is Michael Patterson, and what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. For 20 years, I thought I was just a simple groundskeeper at St. Mary's Cathedral in Boston. I believed my biggest responsibility was keeping the floors polished and the gardens trimmed. I had no idea that I was actually the guardian of one of the most horrifying secrets in the Catholic Church's modern history. 13 years ago, a beloved nun named Sister Catherine vanished without a trace on a train bound for the Vatican. The police said she simply disappeared. No body, no witnesses, no explanation. The case went cold, and everyone assumed she'd suffered some terrible accident, or had chosen to start a new life somewhere far away. I believed that story too, until one October morning when everything changed. You see, I was organizing Sister Catherine's personal belongings when her hymnal slipped from my hands and crashed to the cathedral floor. What happened next still gives me chills. A piece of paper fluttered out from between the pages, a note that had been hidden there for over a decade, waiting for someone to find it, waiting for me to find it. When I read those words written in Sister Catherine's careful handwriting, my blood turned to ice. She hadn't disappeared, she hadn't run away, she had been murdered, and the people who killed her were still out there, still in positions of power, still hiding the truth about what they'd done. But Sister Catherine was smarter than her killers realized. Before they silenced her, she left behind evidence, a trail of clues that would eventually expose a criminal conspiracy so vast and so evil that it reaches into the highest levels of the church and involves crimes against the most innocent victims imaginable. What I discovered in the basement of that cathedral changed everything I thought I knew about faith, justice, and the price of standing up to evil. This is the story of how a simple groundskeeper uncovered one of the most shocking cover-ups in modern history. This is the story of Sister Catherine's courage, and how her sacrifice from beyond the grave finally brought justice to those who thought they were untouchable. But I need to warn you, what you're about to hear is disturbing. It involves corruption at the highest levels, crimes against children, and murders disguised as disappearances. If you're not prepared to learn the dark truth about how far some people will go to protect their secrets, you might want to stop watching now. Still here? Then buckle up, because this story will take you on a journey through hidden tunnels beneath Boston, into FBI investigations that span multiple countries, and face-to-face with killers who will stop at nothing to keep their crimes hidden. You'll discover how one woman's determination to protect innocent children led to her death, and how 13 years later, a fallen hymnal would finally give her the justice she deserved. This isn't just a story about solving a mystery. It's about the power of truth to triumph over evil, no matter how long it takes or how dangerous the journey becomes. And if this story moves you the way it moved me, if it reminds you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice, then I have a favor to ask. Please hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this need to be told. The world needs to know that heroes like Sister Catherine existed, and that their sacrifices weren't in vain. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe truth matters more than power, and leave a comment telling me what you think about Sister Catherine's courage. Your engagement helps ensure that important stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. Now, let me take you back to that October morning when everything changed, when a simple accident revealed a secret that powerful people had killed to protect. My name is Michael Patterson, and I've been the groundskeeper at St. Mary's Cathedral in Boston for nearly 2 decades. The morning that changed everything started like any other October day in New England, the kind where autumn assertively announces its presence with a bitter wind that cuts through even the thickest jacket. I remember pulling my collar tighter as I approached the cathedral's massive oak doors, their iron hinges creaking with the weight of over a century of Boston winters. It was 5:47 a.m. when I turned the heavy brass key in the lock. The same ritual I'd performed 6 days a week for almost 20 years. The cathedral at dawn was my sanctuary, a place where silence held substance, and the air itself seemed to carry the whispered prayers of generations. As those enormous doors swung open, I was greeted by the familiar cocktail of scents that had become as comforting as my morning coffee. Aged wood that had absorbed decades of hymns, the lingering sweetness of beeswax candles, and that distinctive, almost metallic scent of old incense that seemed permanently embedded in the stone walls. The morning light filtered through the magnificent stained glass windows. St. Peter with his keys, the Virgin Mary cradling the infant Christ, the Archangel Michael wielding his sword against darkness. Those windows had been installed in 1892, crafted by master artisans whose names were lost to history, but whose work continued to paint the cathedral floor in jeweled patterns of red, blue, and gold. On this particular morning, the light seemed muted, filtered through the low-hanging clouds that promised rain before noon. I moved through my opening routine with practiced efficiency, checking that the heating system had maintained temperature through the night, ensuring the altar candles were properly positioned for morning mass, and organizing the materials left scattered from the previous evening's choir practice. It was during this last task that my life changed forever. The hymnal collection was housed in the vestry, a smaller chamber adjacent to the main sanctuary where the priests prepared for services. Rows of identical black leather books lined the wooden shelves, each one containing the same collection of traditional Catholic hymns that had been sung in this cathedral for generations. But among these standard volumes was one that stood apart: Sister Catherine's personal hymnal, bound in deep burgundy leather with her initials embossed in fading gold letters. Sister Catherine Sullivan had been 62 when she disappeared 13 years ago, a woman whose presence had been as fundamental to St. Mary's as the cornerstone itself. She'd served this parish for 15 years, arriving as a young nun fresh from her novitiate, and growing into the kind of spiritual leader who knew every parishioner by name, and somehow always appeared exactly when someone needed comfort most. Her hymnal had been her constant companion during services, its pages filled with her careful handwritten notes about tempo, key changes, and personal reminders about which verses held special meaning for particular members of the congregation. After her disappearance, Father Morrison had insisted we preserve her hymnal as a memorial, keeping it in the vestry where it would be safe but visible, a tangible reminder of the woman who had touched so many lives. I'd dusted that book countless times over the years, always handling it with the reverence one might show a holy relic. On this morning, as I reached to straighten the hymnal collection, my fingers caught the edge of Sister Catherine's book. Perhaps it was the way the autumn light struck the leather, or maybe just the accumulated dust that had made it more slippery than usual, but the hymnal slipped from my grasp like water through fingers. Time seemed to slow as it fell. I watched helplessly as the burgundy leather tumbled through the air, its pages fanning open as it descended toward the polished marble floor. The sound it made upon impact was softer than I'd expected, a gentle thud that seemed to echo in the sacred silence of the empty cathedral. But it was what happened next that stopped my heart entirely. As the hymnal struck the floor, its impact caused something to flutter free from between the pages, a piece of paper yellowed with age that danced momentarily in the air like an autumn leaf before settling on the marble beside the fallen book. The paper was folded carefully, precisely, in the manner of someone who understood that important things must be protected. My hands were trembling as I knelt to retrieve both the hymnal and the mysterious note. Sister Catherine's book showed no damage from its fall, but that piece of paper seemed to pulse with significance in my palm. I looked around the empty cathedral, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every creak of the old building settling. The stained glass windows cast their colored light across the floor in patterns that seemed different somehow, as if the very atmosphere had shifted. I unfolded the note with the delicate care of an archaeologist handling ancient parchment. The paper was cream-colored and heavy, the kind of stationery that spoke of quality and permanence. And there, written in the careful Palmer script that I recognized as clearly as my own name, were words that would haunt me forever. If you're reading this, then something has happened to me. The truth about my journey to Rome isn't what everyone believes. There are people who wanted to silence me, and I fear they may have succeeded. Look for the red ledger in the basement archives. Trust no one in authority. May God protect whoever finds this message. See, the handwriting was unmistakably Sister Catherine's. I'd seen it on hundreds of parish bulletins, committee notes, and personal correspondence over the years. Those careful, precise letters with their slight forward slant, the way she dotted her E's with small, perfect circles, the distinctive loop in her capital letters. Every characteristic was exactly as I remembered, but it was the content of the message that sent ice through my veins. Sister Catherine hadn't simply disappeared on that train to Rome 13 years ago. She'd been murdered, and she'd known it was coming. I sank onto one of the nearby pews, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. The cathedral around me seemed to transform before my eyes. The shadows cast by the pillars appeared deeper, more menacing. The silence that had always felt peaceful now seemed pregnant with secrets. Every corner of the building that I'd maintained and protected for 2 decades suddenly felt like it might be hiding something sinister. Sister Catherine had been like a mother to me during my first years at St. Mary's. I'd arrived here in 2005, fresh out of a 3-year prison sentence for armed robbery, a stupid mistake made by a desperate young man who'd run out of options. Father Morrison had taken a chance on me, offering a job when no one else would, but it was Sister Catherine who'd made me feel human again. She'd listened to my story without judgment, helped me find an apartment, and slowly rebuilt my shattered self-respect through small acts of kindness and unwavering faith in my ability to change. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Michael," she told me during one of our early conversations. "The question isn't what you've done, it's what you're going to do now." She'd been right. Over the years, I'd transformed from an ex-convict looking for any job into someone who took genuine pride in maintaining God's house. Every carefully polished pew, every perfectly trimmed hedge, every small repair completed with precision was my way of honoring the trust she'd placed in me. Now, holding her final message in my trembling hands, I realized that my real purpose at St. Mary's was just beginning. Sister Catherine had trusted me enough to hide this note where I would eventually find it. She'd known that my daily routines would bring me into contact with her hymnal eventually, knew that my respect for her memory would ensure I handled her belongings with care. The red ledger. I'd been maintaining the basement archives for years, organizing decades of parish records, financial documents, and historical materials. I knew every filing cabinet, every storage box, every corner of those underground chambers. But I'd never seen anything red that would qualify as a ledger. Then again, I'd never been looking for secrets. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the breast pocket of my work shirt, right over my heart. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with the responsibility of 13 years' worth of unanswered questions. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the first commuters beginning their trek down Beacon Street, the normal world continuing its routine while I sat in the growing realization that nothing would ever be normal again. Sister Catherine's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one in authority. That meant Father Morrison, the police, the church hierarchy, anyone with the power to cover up whatever truth she'd died to expose. I was on my own, just an ex-convict groundskeeper armed with nothing but a cryptic note and 20 years of familiarity with every inch of this cathedral. But as I rose from the pew and looked up at the soaring arches above me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my early days out of prison. Purpose. Real, driving purpose that transcended my daily routines and connected me to something larger than myself. Sister Catherine had been murdered for what she'd discovered. 13 years later, her killer thought the secret was safe. But as I headed toward the narrow stone steps leading down to the cathedral's basement archives, I made a silent promise to the woman who'd saved my soul. I would find that red ledger, uncover the truth she died protecting, and ensure that justice would finally be served. The morning light streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to brighten as I descended into the depths of St. Mary's Cathedral, carrying with me the weight of a 13-year-old mystery and the absolute certainty that powerful people had killed to keep their secrets hidden. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the loyalty of a man who owed everything to the woman they'd murdered. The truth was waiting somewhere in those basement archives, and I was going to find it. The basement of St. Mary's Cathedral always felt like stepping back in time. Stone walls thick enough to muffle any sound, low ceilings supported by ancient wooden beams, and the perpetual smell of damp earth mixed with old paper. I'd spent countless hours down here organizing records, but today felt different. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every creak of the old building made me pause and listen. I started my search methodically, checking every shelf and filing cabinet for anything red. Birth certificates from the 1800s, marriage records, financial documents from decades past, but no red ledger. After 2 hours, my back ached from hunching over boxes, and doubt began creeping in. Maybe Sister Catherine had been paranoid. Maybe there was no ledger at all. Then I remembered the restricted section, a locked cabinet I'd never been given keys to. Father Morrison, our head priest, had always handled those documents personally. I'd never questioned it before, but now Catherine's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one in authority. The lock was old and rusty. A few careful minutes with my maintenance tools, and it clicked open. Inside, behind stacks of yellowed correspondence, I found what I was looking for. A red leather ledger, worn smooth by countless hands. My heart pounded as I opened it. The pages contained financial records, but not the kind you'd expect from a church. Donations from shell companies, payments to mysterious recipients, transfers of large sums with cryptic notations. One entry made my blood run cold. C. Sullivan Inquiry. Permanent resolution required, $50,000 transferred. Sister Catherine's full name was Catherine Sullivan. The entries dated back 15 years, with the most recent notation just 2 weeks before her disappearance. Subject becoming problematic. Vatican trip provides opportunity. Arrange accordingly. It was signed with initials I recognized, F.M. Father Morrison. I sank into the dusty chair beside the cabinet, my mind reeling. The man I'd respected for nearly 20 years, who'd given me a job when no one else would, had apparently orchestrated Sister Catherine's disappearance. But why? What had she discovered that was worth killing for? Footsteps echoed from the stairway above. Heavy, deliberate steps I recognized immediately. Father Morrison was descending to the basement, and from the sound of it, he wasn't alone. I quickly photographed several pages of the ledger with my phone, closed it, and shoved it back into the cabinet. The lock clicked shut just as voices became audible from the stairway. I told you someone was asking questions about Catherine. Father Morrison's voice carried down the stone corridor. We may have a problem. I slipped behind a tall filing cabinet, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Through a gap between boxes, I watched as Father Morrison entered with two men I'd never seen before. Well-dressed, cold-eyed men who definitely weren't parishioners. They were coming for me. Crouched behind the filing cabinet, I held my breath as the three men entered the archive room. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows that made my hiding spot feel increasingly precarious. Through the gap between boxes, I could see Father Morrison's face clearly for the first time in years. Really see it. The kindly expression I'd grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by something calculating and cold. "Oh, the groundskeeper's been down here all morning," one of the strangers said in a flat, professional tone. Security cameras show him accessing areas he's never shown interest in before. Father Morrison nodded grimly. Michael's been with us for 20 years. He knew Catherine well. Too well, perhaps. If he's found something, then we handle it the same way we handled the nun, the second stranger interrupted. His voice sent chills down my spine. These weren't church officials or accountants. These were the kind of men who made problems disappear permanently. I watched in horror as Father Morrison walked directly to the locked cabinet I'd just closed. He produced a key from his cassock and opened it without hesitation. His face darkened as he examined the contents. "The ledger's been moved," he said quietly. "Someone's been through these records." My phone felt heavy in my pocket, weighted down by the photographs I'd taken. Evidence of what appeared to be money laundering, bribery, and murder, all coordinated through St. Mary's Cathedral. But evidence was useless if I didn't live long enough to share it. The men began searching the basement systematically, moving closer to my hiding spot with each passing minute. I needed to move, but the stone floor would echo every footstep. Through the narrow basement window near the ceiling, I could see groundskeeper tools I'd left outside earlier that morning. If I could reach that window, check behind those cabinets, Father Morrison ordered. This was it. I took a deep breath and made my move, scrambling toward the window as quietly as possible. Behind me, I heard the scrape of furniture being moved and knew they'd discovered my hiding spot within seconds. "There!" one of the men shouted. I threw myself at the window, pushing it open and hauling myself up toward the narrow opening. Hands grabbed at my legs as I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders raw against the stone frame. I tumbled onto the grass outside, rolled, and came up running. The cathedral grounds had never felt so exposed. Every tree, every headstone in the adjacent cemetery could hide an enemy. I sprinted toward my truck parked near the maintenance shed, fishing for my keys as footsteps pounded behind me. The engine turned over on the second try, and I floored the accelerator. In my rearview mirror, I saw Father Morrison and his associates emerge from the cathedral's side entrance. One of them was speaking urgently into a phone. I was no longer just a groundskeeper who'd stumbled onto a secret. I was a witness they needed to eliminate, just like Sister Catherine. But unlike her, I had one advantage. I knew they were coming. I drove aimlessly through Boston streets for an hour, checking my mirrors constantly and taking random turns to ensure I wasn't followed. The city felt different now. Every pedestrian could be watching me. Every car could be tracking my movements. The photographs on my phone felt like they were burning a hole in my pocket. Evidence of crimes that reached into the highest levels of the Catholic Church. Finally, I pulled into a diner in Southie, far from St. Mary's and the world I'd known for 20 years. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, seated me in a corner booth where I could watch both the entrance and the parking lot. My hands shook as I ordered coffee and tried to think rationally about my next move. Sister Catherine had trusted no one in authority, but I needed help. The police seemed like the obvious choice, but the ledger had shown payments to city officials with badge numbers listed alongside their names. How deep did this corruption go? Who could I trust with evidence that implicated not just a priest, but apparently half of Boston's power structure? I thought about Catherine's final days before her disappearance. She'd been investigating something. That much was clear from the ledger. But what had she discovered that was worth killing for? Money laundering was serious, but people didn't usually commit murder over financial crimes unless something much bigger was at stake. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know where you are. Come back to the cathedral and we can discuss this reasonably. Continue running, and you'll end up like Sister Catherine." The coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the floor. The waitress hurried over with a towel, concern etched on her face. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." Maybe I had. Maybe Sister Catherine's ghost was trying to warn me through that note, trying to ensure her killer didn't claim another victim. I left money on the table and headed back to my truck, mind racing. I needed to find someone Catherine had trusted, someone outside the church hierarchy who might know what she'd been investigating. Then I remembered Detective Rosa Martinez. She'd been the lead investigator on Catherine's disappearance case 13 years ago. I'd spoken with her several times during the initial investigation, and she'd seemed genuinely concerned about finding the truth. If anyone would listen to me now, it would be her. The Boston Police Department's Central Precinct felt like stepping into a fortress. High ceilings, marble floors, and the constant buzz of activity from dozens of officers and civilians. I approached the front desk with Catherine's note and my phone full of evidence, hoping Detective Martinez was still working here after all these years. Detective Martinez retired 5 years ago, the desk sergeant informed me. But she runs a private investigation service now. Martinez Investigations, down on Atlantic Avenue. 20 minutes later, I stood outside a small storefront office with Martinez Investigations painted on the window. Through the glass, I could see a woman with graying hair bent over a desk covered in case files. When she looked up and saw me, recognition flickered in her eyes immediately. "Michael Patterson," she said as she opened the door. "I remember you from the Sister Catherine case. What brings you here after all these years?" I held up the note with trembling fingers. I think I know what happened to her. Detective Rosa Martinez's office felt like a sanctuary after the morning's chaos. Wall-to-wall filing cabinets, a coffee pot that looked like it had seen better decades, and photographs of solved cases covering every available surface. She gestured for me to sit in a worn leather chair while she poured 2 cups of coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. "I never forgot about Sister Catherine," Rosa said, settling behind her desk. "Her case kept me up at night for years. Something about it never felt right. Too clean, too convenient. A dedicated nun just vanishing without a trace on her way to the Vatican. It stank of a cover-up from day one." I showed her Catherine's note first, watching her weathered face carefully as she read. Her expression darkened with each word, and when she finished, she looked up at me with the intensity I remembered from 13 years ago. "This confirms what I suspected back then," she said. "But suspicion and proof are different things. What else do you have?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs from the red ledger. Rosa's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images, her face growing more grim with each entry. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "Money laundering, bribery, payments to city officials, and this entry about Catherine needing permanent resolution. This is evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. There's more," I said, telling her about Father Morrison and the two men who chased me from the cathedral. "They're cleaning house, Rosa. Anyone who knows the truth is in danger." Rosa leaned back in her chair, processing everything I'd told her. "The corruption goes deeper than just the church," she said finally. "Look at these badge numbers in the ledger. I recognize some of these guys. They're still on the force, some of them in positions of authority. We can't trust the regular police with this." "Then what do we do?" "We investigate the old-fashioned way," Rosa said, standing and moving to a filing cabinet. "I kept copies of everything from Catherine's case, even after I retired. The department wanted me to destroy the files, said they were taking up too much space. That should have been my first clue something was wrong." She pulled out a thick manila folder and spread its contents across her desk. Police reports, witness statements, photographs of Catherine's empty train compartment, and dozens of interview transcripts. Seeing it all again brought back the frustration I'd felt 13 years ago when the investigation went nowhere. "Look at this," Rosa said, pointing to a photograph of Catherine's luggage. Her suitcase was still in the compartment, but her personal journal was missing. At the time, I thought it was odd that someone would steal a nun's diary but leave behind jewelry and cash. What if the journal contained evidence of what she'd discovered? Exactly. And look at this witness statement. A train conductor reported seeing two men in suits entering Catherine's compartment shortly before she disappeared. When I tried to follow up on that lead, I was told the conductor had been transferred to another route and his contact information was classified. Rosa moved to another photograph. This one showing the interior of Catherine's train compartment. See these scratches on the window frame? They weren't there when Catherine boarded. Someone forced that window open from inside. You think they threw her out? Rosa's face was granite hard. I think they murdered her and disposed of the body somewhere along the route between Boston and New York. Then they cleaned up all the evidence and made sure the investigation died a quiet death. She turned to face me directly. "Michael, you realize what this means? We're not just dealing with a corrupt priest and some dirty cops. This is a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of the Catholic Church and city government. People have killed to protect this secret, and they'll kill again." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. Sister Catherine trusted me enough to hide that note where I'd eventually find it. I owe it to her to see this through. "Then we're going to need help," Rosa said, "and I know exactly who to call." Rosa's contact turned out to be FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an uncompromising demeanor. We met at a small restaurant in Cambridge, chosen for its multiple exits and clear sight lines, precautions that would have seemed paranoid a day earlier, but now felt like basic survival. "Detective Martinez filled me in on the basics," Agent Chen said after we'd ordered. "Financial crimes involving religious institutions fall under federal jurisdiction, especially when there's evidence of interstate activity. But I need to warn you both. Investigating corruption within the Catholic Church is like stepping into a minefield. There are powerful people who don't want these secrets exposed." I slid copies of the ledger photographs across the table. Agent Chen studied them with the methodical attention of someone trained to find patterns in chaos. "These shell companies," she said, pointing to several entries. I recognize some of these names from other investigations. They're known money laundering operations with ties to organized crime. If St. Mary's Cathedral was processing payments through these companies, then Father Morrison wasn't just stealing from the collection plate, Rosa finished. He was running a full-scale criminal enterprise out of the church. Agent Chen nodded grimly. And Sister Catherine must have discovered it. Look at the timeline. These payments increased dramatically about 6 months before her disappearance. Something changed in the operation, and she noticed. "What kind of something?" I asked. "Human trafficking," Agent Chen said quietly. "The Catholic Church has extensive international networks, legitimate channels for moving people across borders for missionary work, refugee assistance, adoption services. If someone wanted to exploit those networks for illegal purposes..." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Sister Catherine hadn't just discovered financial crimes. She'd uncovered evidence of people being trafficked through church operations. No wonder they'd killed her. The scandal would have destroyed not just St. Mary's Cathedral, but potentially damaged the entire Catholic Church's reputation globally. "We need more evidence," Agent Chen continued. "The ledger is compelling, but defense attorneys will argue it could be fabricated. We need witnesses, documentation, proof of the actual trafficking operations." Rosa pulled out another file from her briefcase. "I've been thinking about that. 13 years ago, I interviewed several parishioners who mentioned that Sister Catherine had been asking questions about the church's international programs. One woman said Catherine seemed troubled by something she'd discovered in the missionary records. "Is this woman still alive?" Agent Chen asked. "Eleanor Vasquez, age 78, lives in a nursing home in Brookline. I spoke with her last week to prepare for this meeting. She's still sharp, and she remembers Catherine's final months clearly." Agent Chen leaned forward. "What did she remember?" Catherine had been reviewing financial records for the church's international missions, trying to reconcile donations with actual program expenses. She told Mrs. Vasquez that large amounts of money were being spent on transportation and housing for people who didn't seem to exist in any official records. I felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Ghost passengers," I said. "They were using the mission programs as cover to move people illegally, probably charging enormous fees to smuggle individuals across borders." "And when Catherine got too close to the truth," Rosa added, "they eliminated her and made it look like a disappearance." Agent Chen was taking notes rapidly. "Mrs. Vasquez would be a crucial witness, but we need to get to her before Morrison and his associates realize she has information. If they're cleaning house, she could be next," I finished. The thought of another innocent person dying because of this conspiracy made my stomach turn. Sister Catherine had already paid the ultimate price for trying to expose the truth. I wouldn't let her sacrifice be meaningless. "There's something else," Agent Chen said. "If this trafficking operation was as extensive as we suspect, it probably didn't end with Catherine's death. They likely just found new ways to hide it. The current operation could still be active." Rosa and I exchanged glances. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we don't just investigate a 13-year-old murder," Agent Chen replied. "We investigate an ongoing criminal enterprise, and we use every resource at our disposal to bring down everyone involved, from Father Morrison to the city officials taking bribes to protect him." For the first time since finding Catherine's note, I felt a spark of hope. We weren't just seeking justice for a murdered nun. We were potentially stopping crimes that were happening right now. Eleanor Vasquez's nursing home sat on a quiet street in Brookline, its red brick facade and well-maintained gardens designed to project comfort and security. As Rosa, Agent Chen, and I approached the main entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. A black sedan had followed us for several blocks before turning away, but paranoia was becoming a survival instinct. Mrs. Vasquez was waiting for us in the common room, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly as she poured tea from a porcelain set. Despite her age, her voice was strong and her memory remarkably clear. "I've been expecting someone to ask about Sister Catherine for 13 years. she said after we'd introduced ourselves. I knew that girl didn't just disappear. She was too careful, too smart, and she'd found something that scared her badly. Agent Chen leaned forward. What exactly did she tell you about her discoveries? Catherine came to see me about 2 weeks before she disappeared, Mrs. Vasquez began. She was troubled about some financial records she'd been reviewing for Father Morrison. The church was supposedly funding missionary work in Eastern Europe and South America, but when Catherine tried to verify the programs, she couldn't find any evidence they actually existed. What kind of evidence was she looking for? Rosa asked. Reports from the field? Photographs of the work being done? Correspondence with local church officials? Catherine was meticulous about documentation. She'd spent years coordinating legitimate missionary programs and knew what proper records should look like. Mrs. Vasquez paused to sip her tea, her eyes distant with memory. She showed me some of the financial records, enormous payments labeled as transportation assistance and temporary housing, but no names attached to the people supposedly being helped. When she asked Father Morrison about it, he told her those records were confidential and she should focus on her regular duties. But she didn't stop investigating, I said. Of course not. Catherine had a strong sense of justice. It's what made her such a good nun. She started asking questions around the parish, trying to find anyone who had personal knowledge of these mysterious programs. That's when she came across something that really frightened her. Agent Chen's pen was poised over her notepad. What did she find? A parishioner named Maria Santos had approached the church for help, bringing her sister to America from El Salvador. She'd been told the church could arrange a special transportation for $15,000. When Maria couldn't afford the fee, she was told there were other ways to pay. Her sister could work off the debt through church services once she arrived. The implications were horrifying. They were charging people to smuggle them into the country, then forcing them into some kind of servitude to pay off the debt, Agent Chen said. Mrs. Vasquez nodded sadly. Catherine realized the church was involved in human trafficking. She started documenting everything she could find, preparing to take her evidence to the authorities. But someone must have discovered what she was doing. Did she tell you where she kept this documentation? Rosa asked. She said she had hidden copies in a safe place, somewhere even Father Morrison couldn't reach them. She was planning to turn everything over to the FBI after her return from Rome. Agent Chen and Rosa exchanged glances. She never made it to Rome, Agent Chen said gently. I know, Mrs. Vasquez replied, her voice heavy with sadness. The day before she was supposed to leave, Catherine called me. She was frightened, said she thought someone was watching her. She'd discovered something new, something that made the situation even worse than she'd imagined. What was it? I asked. Mrs. Vasquez hesitated, her hands shaking more noticeably. She'd found evidence that children were involved. The trafficking operation wasn't just moving adults, they were smuggling children, supposedly for adoption through Catholic agencies. But Catherine suspected many of these children were disappearing into something much darker. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of television from another part of the nursing home. Child trafficking was among the most serious crimes imaginable, and if the Catholic Church's resources were being used to facilitate it. Mrs. Vasquez, Agent Chen said carefully, do you know what happened to the documentation Catherine had prepared? She said she'd hidden everything in a place that would be discovered eventually, even if something happened to her. She wanted to make sure the truth would come out. I thought about the note that had fallen from Catherine's hymnal. If she'd hidden evidence the same way she'd hidden her warning message. The cathedral, I said suddenly. She hid her evidence somewhere in St. Mary's Cathedral. Rosa looked at me intently. Where? I don't know yet, I admitted. But if Catherine wanted to ensure the evidence would eventually be found, she would have hidden it somewhere a groundskeeper would eventually discover during routine maintenance. Somewhere only someone who knew the building intimately would think to look. Agent Chen stood up. Then we need to search the cathedral tonight before Morrison realizes we're closing in. Mrs. Vasquez reached out and grasped my hand with surprising strength. Find that evidence, she said urgently. Sister Catherine died trying to protect those children. Don't let her sacrifice be in vain. The cathedral looked different in the darkness, less like a house of worship and more like a fortress keeping secrets. Agent Chen had arranged for surveillance teams to monitor the building from discreet positions while Rosa and I entered through the maintenance entrance I'd used for 20 years. The familiar sound of my keys turning in the lock felt surreal, like I was breaking into my own life. Where would she hide something that a groundskeeper would eventually find? Rosa whispered as we made our way through the darkened interior. I thought about Catherine's habits during her 15 years at St. Mary's. She'd been methodical, careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead. If she wanted to hide evidence somewhere, it would eventually be discovered during routine maintenance. The heating system, I said suddenly. The cathedral's heating system is over 100 years old, with miles of pipes and access panels throughout the building. I have to inspect and service different sections on a rotating schedule. If Catherine hid something in one of the less frequently accessed areas. We made our way to the basement, using my flashlight to navigate the familiar maze of corridors. Agent Chen had given us earpieces to maintain contact with her surveillance team, and her voice crackled softly in my ear every few minutes with status updates. No movement outside, she reported. But stay alert if Morrison suspects what we're doing. I led Rosa to the mechanical room where the cathedral's original heating system dominated one entire wall. Cast iron pipes twisted through the ceiling like arteries, disappearing into walls and emerging in unexpected places. Access panels dotted the system at regular intervals, most of them painted over so many times that opening them required considerable effort. This could take hours, Rosa said, examining the extensive network of pipes and panels. Not if I'm right about Catherine's thinking, I replied. She would have chosen a location that was accessible but not frequently disturbed. Somewhere that would be open during annual maintenance but not regular service calls. I moved to a section of the system I only inspected once a year, following a large pipe that ran toward the cathedral's oldest section. Near where the pipe curved toward the exterior wall, I found what I was looking for, an access panel that looked slightly different from the others. The paint was newer, applied more carefully than the hasty maintenance coating on the other panels. This is it, I said, working to open the panel with my tools. Inside, wrapped in plastic and secured with wire, was a manila envelope thick with documents. My hands shook as I pulled it free and opened it carefully. Even in the flashlight's beam, I could see Catherine's careful handwriting covering page after page of notes. Rosa looked over my shoulder as I spread the documents on a nearby workbench. My God, she breathed. Catherine had documented everything. Financial records showing payments from dozens of shell companies, correspondence between Father Morrison and contacts in Eastern Europe and South America, and most damning of all, lists of names with ages, countries of origin, and destination information. Many of the names were followed by the notation under 18. She was right, I said, feeling sick. They were trafficking children, but it was worse than we'd imagined. Catherine's notes revealed that the operation wasn't just smuggling children into the United States, it was moving them between countries based on demand, using the Catholic Church's international network to avoid detection. Some children were listed as adopted through legitimate agencies, but others had notations that made my blood run cold. domestic placement, private arrangement, special services. Rosa was photographing everything with her phone when Agent Chen's voice suddenly crackled urgently in our earpieces. Multiple vehicles approaching the cathedral. Black SUVs moving fast. Get out now. Through the small basement window, I could see headlights turning into the cathedral's parking lot. Multiple vehicles, just as Agent Chen had warned. Morrison had discovered our investigation and was bringing reinforcements. "Is there another way out?" Rosa asked, stuffing Catherine's documents into her jacket. I thought quickly about the cathedral's layout. "The old tunnel system," I said. During Prohibition, there were tunnels connecting the cathedral to buildings across the street. Most of them were sealed, but I know one that's still accessible. Heavy footsteps echoed from the main floor above us, along with voices I recognized. Father Morrison was back, and he'd brought his associates. We were trapped in the basement with evidence that could destroy a criminal enterprise spanning multiple countries and involving dozens of conspirators. "This way," I whispered, leading Rosa toward a narrow corridor that most people didn't even know existed. Behind us, I could hear the sound of doors being forced open as they began their search. They knew we were here, and they knew what we'd found. The only question was whether we could escape with the evidence before they silenced us permanently, just as they'd silenced Sister Catherine 13 years ago. The forgotten tunnel beneath St. Mary's Cathedral smelled of decades of accumulated moisture and decay. Built in the 1920s when the basement was expanded, it had originally connected to the building across the street through a series of maintenance passages. I'd discovered the entrance years ago during routine inspections, but had never explored far enough to find the exit. Rosa followed close behind me as we crawled through the narrow passage, Catherine's documents secured in her jacket. Behind us, the sound of systematic searching grew louder as Morrison's men worked their way through the cathedral. It was only a matter of time before they found the heating room and realized what we'd discovered. "How far does this go?" Rosa whispered, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it has to come out somewhere." Agent Chen's voice crackled intermittently through our earpieces as we moved away from the cathedral. "Lost visual contact, FBI backup units, 15 minutes." The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, occasionally opening into larger chambers that had once housed utilities or storage. My flashlight beam revealed pipe fittings and electrical boxes from decades past, testament to the hidden infrastructure that kept the cathedral district functioning. But we needed to find an exit before Morrison's men discovered our escape route. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, I saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The tunnel ended at a metal grate that opened onto a storm drain system beneath the street. Beyond the grate, I could see the basement of what appeared to be an old office building. "Here," I said, working to remove the grate with tools from my maintenance kit. We emerged into a basement storage room filled with boxes and obsolete office equipment. A narrow stairway led upward, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic through the walls. We were several blocks from the cathedral, far enough away to contact Agent Chen safely. "We're out," Rosa reported through her earpiece, "and we have everything Catherine documented." Agent Chen's relief was audible even through the static. "Thank God. Where are you?" I checked the address on some of the stored boxes. "Looks like we're in the basement of 47 Essex Street. It's an old office building." "Stay there. FBI units are surrounding the cathedral now. Morrison and his associates are trapped." Through a small basement window, I could see flashing lights in the direction of St. Mary's. Police cars, FBI vehicles, and ambulances were converging on the cathedral district. After 13 years, the truth about Sister Catherine's murder was finally coming to light. Rosa was spreading Catherine's documents on a table, organizing them for Agent Chen's arrival. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a particular page. Catherine identified the key players in the trafficking network. Father Morrison was just the local coordinator. This operation involves Catholic officials in at least 6 countries. I studied the names and locations Catherine had documented. Churches in Poland, Guatemala, the Philippines, and other countries were listed as transfer points in the network. Children were being moved systematically, with documentation forged to make them appear as legitimate refugees or adoptees. "How many children do you think they trafficked over the years?" I asked. Rosa's face was grim as she calculated. "Based on these records, probably hundreds, maybe more." The full scope of the operation was staggering. Using the Catholic Church's reputation and international reach, the conspirators had created a trafficking network that could move children across borders with minimal scrutiny. Local officials had been bribed to overlook irregularities, and legitimate adoption agencies had been compromised to provide cover for illegal activities. Agent Chen arrived with a full FBI response team, and the basement quickly transformed into a makeshift command center. Federal agents photographed and cataloged every document, while Chen coordinated with international law enforcement agencies to begin arrests in other countries. "This is one of the largest human trafficking networks we've ever uncovered," Agent Chen told us. Catherine Sullivan's investigation didn't just expose financial crimes. She documented a criminal enterprise that spans multiple continents. I thought about Sister Catherine spending her final weeks uncovering this horrific truth, knowing that powerful people would kill to keep it secret. She'd been brave enough to continue investigating even when she realized her life was in danger, ensuring that the evidence would eventually be found. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we make sure every person involved in this network faces justice," Agent Chen replied. "And we make sure those children who can still be helped are reunited with their families or placed in legitimate protective care." Through the basement window, I could see the cathedral's bell tower silhouetted against the dawn sky. For 20 years, I'd worked in the shadow of those bells, never knowing the dark secrets hidden within the building I helped maintain. Sister Catherine had died trying to expose those secrets, but her courage had finally achieved what she'd set out to do 13 years ago. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse in downtown Boston, watching as Father Morrison was led away in handcuffs after receiving a sentence of life in prison without parole. The trial had made international headlines as prosecutors revealed the full scope of the trafficking network Catherine had uncovered. Morrison's conviction was just the beginning. Arrests had been made in 12 countries, and over 40 individuals were facing charges ranging from human trafficking to conspiracy to commit murder. Agent Chen approached me as the courtroom began to empty. "The final count came in this morning," she said. "We've identified and rescued 127 children who were still trapped in the network. 38 of them have been reunited with their families." The number should have felt like a victory, but I couldn't stop thinking about all the children we hadn't been able to save, all the families destroyed by this criminal enterprise. Sister Catherine's documentation had been meticulous, but it could only account for the cases she'd discovered during her investigation. "What about the others?" I asked. "We're still working on it," Agent Chen replied. "Some of the older cases, the children would be adults now, assuming they survived. We have teams working with international organizations to track down as many as possible, but after so many years..." She didn't need to finish. I understood that some wounds could never be healed, some families would never be reunited. But Catherine's courage had at least ensured that no more children would fall victim to this particular network. Rosa Martinez joined us outside the courthouse, where a small crowd of reporters had gathered to cover the verdict. "The Vatican issued a statement this morning," she told us. "They're implementing new oversight procedures for all international programs and establishing an independent commission to investigate other potential cases of abuse within church networks." I thought about Mrs. Vasquez, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 months earlier. She'd lived long enough to see Father Morrison arrested and to know that Catherine's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Her final words to me had been simple: "Tell Sister Catherine we kept our promise." The media attention had been overwhelming at times, but I'd tried to keep the focus on Catherine's memory and the children who had been rescued. Book publishers and documentary filmmakers had approached me with offers, but it didn't feel right to profit from such tragedy. Instead, I'd established the Catherine Sullivan Foundation to support organizations working to combat human trafficking. St. Mary's Cathedral had been closed, pending a complete investigation of its operations and leadership. The Archdiocese had appointed new administrators and promised full cooperation with ongoing investigations, but the building itself felt forever tainted by the crimes that had been planned and coordinated within its walls. I'd found work at a different parish across town, one with a younger priest who welcomed my experience and shared my commitment to transparency in church operations. It was strange starting over after 20 years, but it felt like the right thing to do. Every morning, when I unlocked the doors and prepared for another day of honest work, I thought about Catherine and the courage she'd shown in her final weeks. The legal proceedings would continue for years as prosecutors worked their way through the extensive network of conspirators. Some would escape justice. Powerful people in distant countries who could afford better lawyers or had connections that would protect them. But the core of the operation had been destroyed, and the children who could still be saved were being helped. Agent Chen walked with me toward the courthouse steps, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the granite facade. "You know," she said, "Catherine would be proud of what you did. She trusted you enough to hide that note where you'd find it, and you didn't let her down." I nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that had driven me for the past 6 months finally beginning to lift. "She was the bravest person I ever knew," I said. "She died trying to protect children she'd never met, investigating crimes that could have gotten her killed, and eventually did. But she won in the end," Rosa added, joining our conversation. "The truth came out, the criminals were caught, and children are safe because of her courage." As we descended the courthouse steps, I reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple accident, a hymnal falling from my hands and revealing a secret that had been hidden for 13 years. Sister Catherine had planned carefully, ensuring that even in death, her investigation would continue. She'd trusted me to finish what she'd started, and somehow, against all odds, we'd succeeded. The bells of nearby churches were ringing 6 o'clock as I walked toward my truck. In the distance, I could see the spires of St. Mary's Cathedral, still imposing against the Boston skyline, but no longer the center of my world. Sister Catherine's spirit seemed to whisper in the evening air, finally at peace, knowing that justice had been served, and that no more innocent children would suffer because of the conspiracy she'd died exposing. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. The truth had prevailed, and the children were safe. None vanished on train to Vatican 13 years later. A note falls out of her hymnal. A story of courage, corruption, and the ultimate triumph of justice over evil